Is a parametric EQ pedal really necessary for guitarists? If you want to take your EQ game to the next level, then after graphic EQ, there's parametric EQ. I've been playing around with this new pedal from GFI System that they kind of sent over to me, and even though I love a good graphic EQ pedal, it has made me realise that graphic EQ for a lot of situations really is a compromise in comparison to a good parametric EQ. So one of the first things I noticed with parametric EQ is the smoother shelving. With graphic EQ, even though it looks like you're shelving the frequencies sometimes, highs or lows, what you're actually doing is creating lots of little notches, because that's what graphic EQ is. It's, control over lots of small notches of frequencies. So you still get lots of these little bumps in the EQ curve when you try and shelve frequencies. With parametric EQ, you don't get that and you can't hear it as much. So I find it sounds a little bit more natural, a little bit smoother, and I find it easier to get the exact settings that I want with a parametric EQ. I use shelving like this for a few things, and one way you can use it is to tame an inherently bright and open sounding guitar amp that maybe doesn't have a bright switch or a presence control. And you probably still want it to sound bright and clear, but shelving the high frequencies in a particular way can just take away some of that really harsh, airy high end and stop it sounding too open, especially with overdrive. Sometimes it's useful to shelve the low end frequencies, like if I ever have to set up in the corner of a small venue or something like that, that can create a bass trap where all these like crazy sub bass frequencies start to resonate and makes you sound really boomy and you just lose clarity in your sound. And yeah, sure, you can turn the bass control down on your amp, that will help, but that can often make your guitar sound really thin at the same time. So a much better option is to shelve the low end frequencies in a particular way. And it's often a bit more of a bass player problem, this, but it does happen to guitarists as well. One thing that graphic EQ does really well at is notching out any specific unwanted frequencies. So say if you've got a high mid spike in a speaker that you want to just tame, or maybe you've got a digital amp that has a weird frequency response in it, stuff like that it's quite good at, and it's because the frequency bands in a graphic EQ are quite narrow and notched. But parametric EQ does it almost even better, because you can use the Q control to, narrow that EQ adjustment, so it's just like the one on your graphic equalizer, but you're not restricted to the preset frequencies on the graphic EQ. With a parametric EQ, you can sweep through the frequencies so you can get just the right frequency that you want to adjust. I think this notching out of particularly a specific mid frequency is a really nice way to improve your clean sounds. Of course, you can get the same benefits if you want to boost specific frequencies as well. So if you want a cocked wah sound, you can sweep through those frequencies in the same way you would sweep through the frequencies on a wah pedal, and then just find that exact sweet spot that you want. If you like the high mid spike of a Celestion V30 speaker, you can find that notch where you can hear that type of sound and emulate that sort of thing as well. So those are some of the basic things you can do with parametric EQ. And remember, parametric EQ doesn't have to be complicated. If you're just using it for a bit of high shelving, or just using it to boost a very specific mid frequency for whatever reason, you've already really justified using a parametric equalizer over a graphic EQ. Parametric EQ doesn't have to be about these big, elaborate, convoluted adjustments in EQ. You don't have to use all 5 bands. This one has 8, for God's sake. It doesn't need to be complicated. You can keep parametric EQ very simple if you want it to. Having said that, sculpting the frequencies on a parametric EQ does have its uses, especially on one like this where you can save a load of your settings as presets. It's got a boost too. It's a great way to get more versatility out of your existing equipment. So here I've tried to voice my old OD3 to sound similar to one of my more expensive overdrive pedals, the Centura Overdrive. I've got a whole video where I do this with a graphic equalizer, like emulating various classic drive pedals, but I did find it a lot easier to do with this parametric EQ. It was a bit quicker to do and just sounded a bit more accurate to me. So see what you think. Remember, you don't need to emulate a specific piece of gear. You can just use parametric EQ to get a very different sound that's specific to what you need. So staying with the OD3, which I think is a pretty vintage style, vintage voiced overdrive sound, I can use the parametric EQ to make it sound like a much more modern setup if I want to switch to that sound occasionally and get both of those sounds available. So I'm thinking, big low end, quite a obvious mid scoop, then emphasize the high mids so it sounds bright and clear, but just roll off and shelve some of the really airy frequencies at the top end so that it doesn't sound like fizzy and cheap. I don't think you can get that kind of detail out of most graphic equalizers. It's something where I feel like I've got a lot more control with this sort of parametric EQ. Something that I always struggled to get with a graphic EQ pedal was a pleasant sounding simulation of an acoustic guitar. You know, even with a dedicated acoustic simulator pedal into an acoustic amp, the sound for me is kind of hit and miss depending on like what kind of guitar I'm using, maybe what kind of band setup it is. But with parametric EQ, I found it a lot easier to get a more pleasant, natural tone that, yeah, it doesn't, you know, sound totally like an acoustic guitar, but it's a nice, pleasant movement and drift into that acoustic type tone. See what you reckon?